Tech Solutions President Antoine Jackson joins this week to talk news from Kaseya, Enable, Huntress, and more, plus a great interview with Intel's Stephanie Hallford and Michael Nordquist on current conditions in the Endpoint market and the newest edition of vPro. It's ChannelPro Weekly, number 236, Cheerios versus Starvation. Hello and welcome to ChannelPro Weekly, episode number 236. My name is Matt Whitlock, technology editor, online director, and your host of this fine show for people out there like you. And when I say like you, who am I talking about? Well, if you don't know yourself, you might want to seek therapy, but I can at least give you a rough idea of who you are. You're human. It's good to be human. You are alive. Because if you weren't alive, you wouldn't be hearing this, and that would also be a problem. But most importantly, you are a VAR, an IT integrator, an MSP, which stands for Managed Services Providers, for those who don't know what that is, apparently. You are a security consultant, you're an IT consultant, you're a system builder. I forgot about you last week, but not this week. You are any of one of those things, but if most importantly, you do those activities, those IT businessy related activities with other businesses. That's kind of the key, and you are part of the SMB channel. So welcome one and all. If that sounds like you are in the right place. And we actually have someone, a guest host, who's going to who might even fit that description. We'll get to him in just a second, but first let me bring into the fold the man of the hour, the one who joins me each and every week to make this show what it is. Without him, it wouldn't be as good as it is. So please welcome executive editor Rich Freeman.
You know, Matt, I was doing so well there. I was. It's like human, check, alive, check, and then you got to the MSP VAR part, and yeah, I'm a journalist. I write for and about, but I don't. So I don't know. Am I supposed to be here?
Well, because you write for them, and this is a show for them, I think you're in the right place. But if not, you'll learn, and you'll make your way to be accepted in one of the group. But until then, I don't know. You might just have to sit there and be quiet. I'm not sure. But at least we hit on the alive part. The alive part is the part that was really, really the most important. And you are alive and home. Apparently, you are in Seattle this week.
Indeed. Gosh, what, 8 days ago, I came back home from, and you mentioned or said earlier on that something about last week. We were actually not on the air last week because we were in Charlotte, North Carolina.
We were in the backyard of our guest host, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but that is a perfect segue to introduce our guest host today. Super excited to have him back on the show. He's the president and founder of Tech, which is a Raleigh, North Carolina-based managed service IT firm. He has over 15 years of experience in the IT industry. He's been featured in the Triangle Business Journal, ChannelPro SMB magazine. He also holds a 4th degree black belt in Taekwondo and is a former U.S. national and U.S. Open medalist. Please welcome the one, the only, the awesome Antoine Jackson. Welcome, Antoine.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. As always, I'm always excited to be here. I'm actually coming to you live from St. Pete, Florida. I'm here for a peer group meeting for one of our marketing vendors.
Well, that's super fun. You'll have to tell us a little bit more about that in a second, but you are from the Raleigh, North Carolina area, and we were actually just wrapped our show in Charlotte, North Carolina, and you're a couple hours away from Raleigh. And it was a stunning success, I would say. Rich, wouldn't you?
You know what, and I guess people would expect us to say that, but really, folks, we were so, and in fact, we thank the ChannelPro community from Charlotte and the environs around there, because you folks really turned out in force for this event. You were engaged all the way through the day. It was just a great crowd, great energy. We got questions from the audience that were interesting. It went really, really well.
It did. It was one of the more engaging audiences I think we've had. Like we had some we have our sessions that we have, and we have stuff planned out for the sessions, but of course we always prioritize audience questions because that's why they're there. They want to get their question answered. And there was a lot of cases where, like, I don't think we got to any of the content we'd planned. It was just all answering questions, which makes for a more engaging day by far.
No question about it. No question about it. And before we move on, I will quickly point out this was the 4th in 6 SMB Forum events that we're doing this year. So that means there are 2 more to go, including one in Washington, D.C., right outside Dulles Airport. That one's coming up just in a few weeks, September 7th and 8th. The 8th is sort of the main day. And then in November 2nd and 3rd, we're going to be in Los Angeles for our friends in Southern California. Terrific content, if I do say so myself. We're going to be talking about security. We're talking about hiring and retention, strategy in the managed services market, and particularly around mergers and acquisitions right now and exit strategies. We've got a great session on making money with Microsoft Azure. So terrific content. We're going to be in DC coming up real soon, and then Los Angeles in November, and you can get more details about all of this. And also the Business Management Online Summit event, the next virtual event that we're doing in October. Details on all this is available at events.channelpronetwork.com.
And if that alone is not enough to incite you to come to especially to the DC event, which is coming up real fast, September 6th? No, September. You think I would know when this is? No, it's what date is it?
3 days the 7th.
7th and 8th.
The 7th. Yep.
Yeah, 7th and 8th. So if all of the talk of excellent content and learning and getting new stuff isn't enough to entice you, maybe a T-shirt will. And for those who are watching on YouTube, hit the bell, hit the like, hit the subscribe button, hit all the buttons. But you can see that I'm wearing our official 2022 events T-shirt. It's kind of, we always had to have these like fun creative T-shirts that we do every year. This one is like, I think, the coolest one we've ever done. It's got like for those who are listening, it's got like the sriracha kind of logo. It's like a red shirt, and it has like the sriracha kind of rooster on it, and it has like, you know, Channel Pro events and stuff on it. It's like super cool. And we have some of these that we give away throughout the day. So if a T-shirt is what it takes to get you there, come on in and try to win a T-shirt and walk home with one of these babies, because they are awesome. Come and check them out. And of course, Antoine has been to some of our events. I'm not even going to tell him what to say, but I bet if I say, hey, Antoine, tell people about our events, I bet he's going to say something like,
absolutely. Awesome. They're awesome. They're very informative. I mean, I'd even say that shirt is fire, hot-ish, all the above. So, but no, it's really great content, and it's really good for any size MSP, you know, MSPs just getting started or just trying to get exposed to the space, even your very super mature MSPs. I think there's something for everybody.
And maybe a T-shirt is in it for Antoine as well. I didn't tell him to say any of that stuff, folks. But so believe me, that's coming straight from the expert's mouth. Come and check it out. Come check it out. I'll make it easy if you want to come to the DC show. I'm going to put a graphic up on the screen for those who are watching on YouTube. If you're not watching, you can go to channelproforum.com/DC. I believe is where I put it at. Hopefully that works. Otherwise, just scan the QR code with your phone. That's the easiest way to do it. I'll take you right to the registration page. Use promo code CPVIP. That will get you in the door for free and bypass that. But you're going to get a lot out of the event, and maybe an awesome T-shirt. You never know. So Antoine, it's great to have you back on the show. It's really exciting. I know last time we were on, we were talking about like your background in Taekwondo, which is really cool. And we could talk about that for a lot, but I know we're already going to have a kind of a long show today. So I'm going to throw people over to the episode, the last episode that you were on, to learn a little bit more about your Taekwondo background. That's episode 192 for those that are want to go back and check that out. The Noah's Ark approach. I remember that show too. That's a fun one.
Mind you, all this was pre-dad bod, so you know, take it with a grain of salt.
Absolutely, but I would love to give you an opportunity to tell people a little bit more about you, a little bit more about your business, and some of that kind of stuff. So take it away.
Yeah. So when I started my MSP, I started with just myself. You know, we've been in business since December 2012, January 2013. So we're creeping up right on that 10-year mark. When we started, it was literally just me. I think I had one offshore employee because that was all I could afford, and a really good friend of mine that decided to work for me. And you know, since then we've grown, you know, a lot over the last decade, and still continuing to grow and continuing to strategize. We're at currently, I think, 17 employees, 7 offshore, and then the rest, of course, here in the U.S. So yeah, it's been a wild ride, a wild journey. Let me tell you, I've seen a lot, over the last decade. I've definitely made a lot of mistakes and missteps along the way, but it's all about growth and trying to figure out a way to get better. And quick plug for one of my vendors. I'm actually here at Marketopia's headquarters in the St. Pete, Tampa area. And, they were part of that journey for me as well, helping me grow. So I always want to give shout outs to my partners and vendors, as I'm working with them. So.
Fantastic.
We
go ahead, Rich.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say we're good friends with the folks at Marketopia as well. We've had them on before on the show. When was the last time? He was on?
It's been a little while. I've been thinking we need to get him back on it. We did a Christmas show, like a holiday show, with both Terry and Andra Hedden once upon a time, talking about marketing, and I don't think they've been on since. So we should definitely rectify that at some point. And then I always like pointing out that there may be no accomplishment at ChannelPro that I am more proud of than this. The very first time we did one of these SMB Forum events we were just talking about, Terry Hedden, who was an MSP at that time, was one of the speakers. And Andra, different last name at that time, was working for Tech Data. That's where they met. They met at our show, and then I forget how much longer down the road, they eventually got married and they created Marketopia. So in a small way, we are responsible for that very happy marriage and for Marketopia. And like I said, I could not be more proud. They're wonderful people, and I'm glad we were able to bring them together.
Well, thank goodness it worked out. Otherwise, we'd be like, oh, we have to ruin their lives or something. Thank goodness it ends. It's still a happy story. Yeah. Otherwise, it might turn around, might come to bite you in the butt down the road. So yeah, no, it has been a while since we got Terry on. They were last on. Terry and Andra joined us episode 128. So it was back in 2019. That was pre-pandemic, Rich.
Whole different world back then.
Right. We should get them back on just to kind of see how all that went for them. It's been a long time. We'll have to do that. So, Antoine, great to have you on. We've got a lot of news to roll in. And I know that we'll learn a little bit more about you, a little bit more about your thoughts as we go through here. But we want to kind of get things rolling. And I have that show sheet up from 128. So let me get the current one up. Otherwise, I'm going to sound like I'm really, really out of date. We're talking about news that's 3 years old. So what are we talking about today, Rich? We've got Kaseya in the news. We've got Enable, Huntress, Ingram. We've got a story we're going to talk about how, when, and why to fire clients. A really, really important topic, especially as you start to get a little bit bigger and you want to start making your operation a little bit more efficient. Getting rid of inefficient clients is one way to do that. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. We've got an awesome interview coming up with Stephanie Hallford and Michael Nordquist. They're from Intel. We're going to talk a little about vPro, current conditions in the endpoint market. A really, really interesting conversation. So you're definitely going to want to join us for that. And always surprises around every corner. You never know what you're going to get with ChannelPro Weekly. So you're just going to have to listen to find out. But I can tell you what you're going to hear about first, and that is Kaseya. They're responding to some complaints. Is a company listening to their customers, Rich? What is going on?
You know what? Kaseya did actually listen to their customers. Now, as we're recording this, it's like 10 days after this news broke. So this is not exactly breaking news here, new information, but first time we've had a chance to talk about it on this podcast. And I'm glad it just kind of worked out this way, but I'm glad that we have Antoine here who can kind of speak to this sort of directly. Basically what happened late in 2020, November 2020, Kaseya updated its pricing, and like a lot of vendors, basically they offered very substantial discounts for longer term contractual commitments, like up to 70%, basically depending on what you're buying. And their take on the position that put them in was, we have this auto renewal program. Anniversary dates are going to be coming up. If we renew somebody on a short term, like a 1 year deal at 1 year, they might see a price hike. They're going to be upset. If we change them over to a 3-year deal, they could actually see a price reduction, and they can kind of lock in those better prices for 3 years. So not an easy choice to make. They made the choice. This is how they kind of, describe the thinking at the time, that we're going to take people who are otherwise faced with a price hike And we're going to bump anyone with a shorter deal than 3 years up to 3 years when their auto renewal date comes around. This is late 2020. As everybody, pretty much everybody in our audience right now knows, this was not a popular decision with their partners. And there were a lot of people who felt like they were kind of blindsided by this. They didn't really know it was coming. They didn't really get a chance to discuss it with Kaseya. Some people aren't comfortable with that long a commitment. So last Monday, they changed that policy. Basically, they updated their end user license agreement, and now basically, if you are in their auto renewal program, when your next anniversary date comes up, you will renew at whatever contract duration you are at now. So let's just kind of make clear what that means. If you have a 1-year deal right now, you don't have to worry anymore about Kaseya turning that into a 3-year deal. On the other hand, if you had a 1-year deal, they bumped you up to 3 years. You will auto renew at 3 years unless you step in and change that, if that's not what you want to do. Now, all of this applies to their auto renewal partners when the next anniversary date comes up. If you are in a 3-year deal right now that you didn't choose and aren't happy with, one of the other things they announced is they are now permitting people to cancel that contract and buy something else. They're not doing this by default. You have to call your Kaseya account manager and say, I want to change the terms of the deal, and they will let you do that. The other thing that's new that you couldn't do before is now you are allowed to opt out of the auto renewal process at any time. I'm not familiar with how the rules worked before, but there were some limits around when you could or couldn't get out of their auto renewal program. Those are gone. And the other thing that they have done, basically, because again, partners were saying, where did this come from? Why didn't you guys tell me? And Kaseya was saying, well, we did notify you. But I mean, channel pros are getting hit by information from tons of vendors and all their customers every day. That it's just a lot of information coming in, and a lot of people just didn't see those communications. And so in the past, they would notify partners about an approaching renewal date 60 days in advance. They've advanced that now to 90 days. So they're going to start telling partners your anniversary date's coming up a little bit earlier, and they're going to double the number of times that they notify you about that, in the hope that they are dramatically reducing the odds of somebody just not getting the word about an auto renewal coming up. And then quickly, before we get Antoine's take on this, the last thing I'll point out, one reason why this is happening now and why there's been a lot of chatter, online among channel pros just in the last few months about this auto renewal policy, is that it came up when Kaseya announced in April that they were going to be buying Datto, and there were a lot of Datto partners who said, "Oh no, now they're going to force me into a 3-year deal or a long-term deal, and I don't want that." So just to emphasize, because the Kaseya folks emphasize it to me, we have not changed the terms of any Datto partner's contract on any Datto product since that acquisition closed in June. Whatever contract you have with Datto is untouched since that acquisition. And nothing that I just discussed here about auto renewals, et cetera, none of that affects Datto contracts going forward. So, I mean, we'll see what the future holds for Datto's contracts, but they emphasize no effect. There has been no change to Datto contracts. There are none that we have announced or are announcing in conjunction with this auto renewal policy change.
It's a pretty surprising story. And I think that the most surprising part of the story to me is that someone there actually thought this was a good idea. It's not a good idea. Antoine, this was not a good idea?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that, at least with these changes, I think the biggest thing that we have to kind of think about, and we're just, we're being honest, is, Kaseya has had a lot of PR challenges, over the last couple of months. I mean, I'm sure they are probably not the biggest fan of being always in the news, especially in the channel since the Datto acquisition. I think, for right now, the biggest challenge for them is, winning hearts and minds, right? So obviously you have two different companies, two different cultures that have now been married together. And obviously they're navigating through those challenges, and they're having to deal with, partners, former partners, new partners, outside partners who have, their different takes and experiences of Kaseya. And obviously, one of the big things that I've read and I've seen and, is that they feel a lot of partners, especially ones that are former, disgruntled partners, is that they felt like there were unfair business practice, right, with this auto renewal and this kind of, surprise renewal rate. So I think what, Kaseya is ultimately trying to do is they're trying to win the hearts and minds of the partners by, obviously making this change. I think that making this change is maybe a step in the right direction, at least because now you're getting noticed and at least you're putting it out there that, look, this is more of an olive branch of letting you know that when we were renewing you at 3 years, it wasn't meant to lock you in for 3 years. Maybe it was, but at least it was from a perspective of, we're trying to do it from the perspective of price, right? We're trying to always give you the best price. And I will say that, being fair is, because they always does try to win on price. I'll give them that. But I think one of the biggest turnoffs for a lot of partners has been those 3-year agreements, right? They feel like they're handcuffed to that product. And, the industry changes, it evolves. I mean, what I was using 3 years ago may not be what I'm using today, especially on the security front. So I think, them being a little bit more transparent on that side and maybe giving a little bit better notice is definitely stepping in the right direction as they try to navigate through this whole PR challenge of really changing their brand or changing the MSP's perspective of them. You got to keep in mind, I mean, a lot of us, whether we admit it or not, a lot of us are Kaseya partners by association, right? Because we've had some product that was acquired, like whether it's ID Agent, whether it's IT Glue. So a lot of us are already a part of that Kaseya, ecosystem. So what I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to overcome the challenge of how do we make our current partners feel better about being a Kaseya partner, and then along the terms, how do we also make it easier for these new Datto partners who has a different culture fit, a whole different experience? How do we also make them feel comfortable as things continue to evolve and change? Because like Rich said, I mean, we don't know what the future holds. Right now, everything seems to be status quo, at least, or at least we think it is. I know I already received my 90-day notice that, I do have a contract that's renewing. So they are holding true to that, and I did get it. I do think it's also very beneficial now that you can say proactively, hey, I don't want to renew this agreement, because now you can get that out on the front end. I know some vendors make you wait until you're within that 60-day window to tell you that. So I do appreciate that at least they're trying to improve that relationship with the MSP, because at the end of the day, despite all the positive and negative news that's been in the media, it's all about the partners, right? So the goal for them should be to do whatever they can to do right by the partners, because I think if they can, do that, then some of these other things over time will not be as impactful or negative, I guess.
Well said. Well said. And it's probably a good thing. I can't think of any subscription service I've ever had personally or used professionally that automatically just renews for triple the commitment without any notification. Like, that's just crazy. So
yeah, I mean,
good for them for realizing that this was probably not a good idea.
Yeah, agreed.
And fixing it, right? At least they fixed it. And I think what they put in place makes more sense. Rich, anything else to add?
And now I'll just echo what you said. I mean, it was a wise move. There's a lot of wariness out there among Datto partners right now. And so to do like what you were calling an olive branch, Antoine, this was probably a well-timed move. It's not going to eliminate that wariness, though. I mean, people are still waiting. The Datto partners in particular are still waiting to see what happens. But wise move to address this now before it just kind of kept simmering. And then maybe the bottom line lesson for everyone here is just about the importance of communication, because maybe if they had told partners earlier and more often and more loudly before about this auto renewal policy, a lot of this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, obviously in our space, we have contracts with our clients, or at least we should have contracts. And some of us, do 1, 3, 5-year agreements. So I think that, we look at it from a different lens, because we look at it from our client's lens as they would treat us if we were to auto renew them at that term, right? So it is good to finally see that, at least the vendors are starting to listen to what the partners want, because I think that's important, right? Because once again, this channel, as big as it is, it's really small. And I really think that, if Kaseya really wants to be able to withstand the storm that they've kind of had to endure, they need to continue to have those ears open for what partners' opinions are. So.
Very good. Well, it's a good thing that they did, and it's a good thing that they're fixing it and being more communicative. That is how you will win trust with your customers and with your partners. So good on them for doing that. Next up, we've got Enable in the news. We've been talking a lot about cloud management, Rich, and it looks like Enable's throwing their hat into the ring. Tell us about it.
Yeah, you know what? And I'll kick it off by giving kudos to Enable for moving pretty quickly, because it was just a few weeks ago in July. We probably talked about this on the podcast last month. Enable announced that they had acquired a company called SpinPanel that makes a cloud management tool for Microsoft 365. And by golly, just a few weeks later, this week in particular, Enable now has a product based on the SpinPanel platform in market and available for use. It's called the Enable Cloud User Hub. It is a Microsoft 365 user management kind of solution, creating and managing accounts, adding and removing users, assigning licenses, etc. It is designed to centralize a lot of those tasks. It is designed to automate them to enable, it's multi-tenant, obviously, but it's also designed to increase technician productivity by automating a lot of these tasks. So they have these things that they call command blocks, which are little bits of reusable pre-written code that correspond to particular tasks. They have a drag and drop interface. You can pull the command blocks in the order that you want and tweak them if you want to, and those become command sets, and those are just automations that you can run to take all the steps you normally take in the order you take them when you want to add a user, for example, or somebody leaves one of your clients. There is some cost optimization functionality in there. They will point out if there are purchased but unused licenses that you could potentially help your clients save some money by eliminating. There's some security functionality in there around role-based permissions, privileged access rights management, security assessments of cloud environments to kind of point out vulnerabilities you can help a customer address. If you wait 30 to 45 days, there's going to be centralized billing functionality in the solution as well. That's coming soon. It'll include billing reconciliation on an automated basis, so you're not going to have to go through that awful chore of reconciling users and consumption and all that stuff yourself. Right now, there is no integration between the Cloud User Hub and Enable's two RMM systems or its PSA system. They've got some integration coming. They've got single sign-on for all those different solutions coming. Right now, those are kind of in separate spheres. Interestingly enough, Enable sees this product as potentially being appealing to cloud-first MSPs out there or service providers out there who don't want an RMM, and so they think a lot of the early adopters might actually not need that integration, but there will be some integration coming further along. And then last thing I'll say, this is a Microsoft 365 cloud management tool. As far as I know, it is the first one of its kind from one of the big incumbent RMM PSA vendors. We know that Kaseya has previewed something that they're going to be introducing later this year, and Datto has talked about how important this is to them. I'm sure ConnectWise is thinking about it, but of the biggies out there, Enable is the first one to market with a product specific to Microsoft 365. And they did say they're moving beyond Microsoft 365. And so the natural follow-up question is, are you talking Azure? Are you talking AWS? And they said, we're not saying, but you will find out soon. So there is more cloud management coming from Enable in the not too distant future.
Very, very astute guesses on where they're probably going to be going. M365, Azure, AWS, Google Workspace. I mean, there's only so many of these things, right? So I think that makes the most sense. The command blocks thing sounds pretty cool. I got to say, that really does sound neat. Antoine, what do you think?
I mean, I think that this is a game changer, especially, from a management perspective. I mean, think about how much time you spend, hopping between different tenants, doing things that are pretty easy. I mean, obviously with, issues finding good technicians and hiring, I think that this is going to take, in some organizations where they have multiple technicians kind of, dealing with this can almost become a one-person job. So I think that you'll see some productivity and efficiency there. I think that, this right here also opens up, the door for some of these bigger RMM or PSA players to some of these really small integrators that maybe their only line of business is selling Office 365 or Google Workspace, and maybe they are just selling cloud solutions and not those traditional managed services. So I think, both sides can actually win from this solution. I think the MSPs are really going to see some heavy productivity from this. But I also think you're going to see some of these smaller players start to flock towards Enable. And I think, Enable being first is always good, right? And I think that this will really help, people maybe even start to explore some of Enable's products. So it's a smart move.
It is. I 100% agree. And and even though they're jumping in now, there's going to be more jumping into this space over the next year, Rich. We're going to probably be talking about other companies doing very, very similar things.
Yeah, and from my perspective, that's kind of the game-changing aspect of this announcement. I mean, we've been talking for the last certainly year and a half, 2 years about how SMBs are moving even faster than ever into the cloud. The big RMM systems from the big RMM makers are very much device-oriented products without cloud management, extensive cloud management functionality, certainly. And as a result of that, that cloud management space has been sort of owned by smaller, newer, younger companies that's all they do. And so I'm thinking Nerdio and Augment, Better Cloud, Jump Cloud. There are a bunch of them out there, and we've spoken on the podcast before about how there's this kind of race, like who's going to win this race. The smaller companies that they're born in the cloud, this is what they know, or the bigger companies that don't do any cloud management right now but have all the name recognition and the money and so on. So this is the first time one of those big companies actually has a product out there in market. Datto has done some backup around Azure, but I think this is the first sort of user management solution out there right now. And so that is now that changes the landscape. And you're absolutely right, Matt. We're going to see the other big names out there do this more and more in the months ahead, and then we'll kind of see where MSPs place their loyalties based on that. Do they drift towards the companies that are sort of born in the cloud specialists? Do they standardize with the companies that have these integrated suites? It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, well, and the one thing you said too is that the companies that have these bigger suites have brand recognition and money, and those are two very, very, very important things to getting success. So we will I might kind of put my bets on that over the long term, but I guess we will find out. So another company that I'd never bet against is Huntress. They have been all over the news the last couple of years. They've been a big key player in lots of interesting things, and they've got some really, really cool security tools, and they've rolled out another one. Rich, what is it?
And the interesting thing about Huntress is, and it makes writing about them a little bit tricky, because it's like you want to say that they introduced a new product, but really from their standpoint, they have one product. They have a platform, and what they keep doing, they've been continually doing since they opened their doors, is adding new capabilities to that platform. And what they added this week is a new managed endpoint detection and response service called Process Insights. If you are a Huntress subscriber, this is available. You're getting this now at no extra charge. It's just now part of the platform going forward. The idea is in their SOC, they are collecting telemetry from the over 1.5 million devices under management that Huntress partners support. They are looking at application processes running on those devices. If they see anything suspicious, anything anomalous, they analyze it themselves. They have a whole team of very, very experienced security analysts. So they will kind of look at that suspicious activity, screen out the false positives. If it's something that you as an MSP really do need to be concerned about, they will upload what they're calling a playbook to your PSA system. So you'll get an alert. There's an issue, you need to deal with it, and dealing with it will consist of clicking a button, and then they will apply a remediation that they've kind of predefined, basically. And so they're saying that this allows any MSP basically to deal very quickly with endpoint security issues. Even a junior tech, you don't need to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for a security analyst to kind of figure out what's important and how to deal with it. They also pointed out that increasingly increasingly these days, one of the check boxes that your customers have to check off to get cyber insurance is not just do they have EDR, but is it 24/7 EDR? And this is a 24/7 service monitored out of the Huntress SOC. So that alone can actually be kind of helpful to partners out there. Now, all of this is based on technology Huntress bought in January 2021, along with a company called Level Effect. That's 19 months ago, and they've kind of finally got a Level Effect based product out there. And the reason it took them that long is because there are a lot of enterprise EDR systems out there, but they needed this system to be a managed EDR product at a price point that will work for MSPs who serve SMBs. So that their view of the sweet spot basically is, can we do this for $2 to $4 per endpoint per month? And that the enterprise stuff, I mean, Antoine might know this better than I do, but I mean, it's selling for $15, $20, $25 per user per month. So it is a lot of work to take that big system, make it worth having, something that really is going to make your customers safer, but deliver it at $2 to $4 per endpoint per month. And that's why it kind of took them so long. And the key to that is sort of hinted at in the name of this service. They call it Process Insights because it focuses specifically on application processes. The way that Kyle Hansloven, the CEO of Huntress, put it to me yesterday when I spoke with him about this, is they were looking for a way to zero in on 20% of the EDR problem that's going to deliver 80% of the value. It's those processes that are really where the trouble is going to happen. And so that's where they kind of zeroed in. They just, they've been beta testing this for a long time, actually, first in a small beta and a larger one more recently. In July, this Process Insight service was responsible for 24% of the incidents that Huntress detected and dealt with. And so that, they are definitely adding some more security, some more visibility into the stack by adding this on in there. And then last thing I'll say, they, their strategy basically is to, how does Kyle put it? Go to where the hackers are going. They're always kind of looking at trends in the industry, and that's what they're kind of building the platform towards. And so they are going to be building the platform towards some of the more cloud-focused, user-focused threats that are out there right now. So we didn't actually talk about this in the podcast, but just very recently, they bought a security awareness training vendor for $22 million. They will have a security awareness training program or solution coming probably about a year from now, just like this EDR product. They're going to want to get that, scale that right, get that right for MSPs. And then the other thing that I think listeners will find interesting, Huntress today has a managed antivirus product based on Microsoft Defender. Coming up early in 2023, they're going to have a managed detection and response service specifically for Microsoft 365. And they say this is one of the top requests they get from their partners. That is coming relatively soon.
Very cool. And I will also just give Huntress kudos and props for not naming it Process Insight 360 or Process One. So good job to their marketing team for that one. Antoine, lots of good stuff in here.
Oh yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, so it's funny because I feel like the writing's kind of always been on the wall, at least for Huntress. So one thing you got to give them credit for, they're one of the early vendors out there from a security standpoint, from threat hunting aspect. And now that this security space feels like it's starting to get crowded with, the dawn of all these different security vendors and companies, Huntress is constantly trying to find ways to differentiate themselves by almost creating this security complete, suite. So I think it's really remarkable that, even though, yes, they're vendor agnostic and they'll play nice with all the other platforms out there, they're now starting to try to hone some of these things into their internal portfolio, probably trying to position themselves to continue to be, a security juggernaut. I think it's genius, I do think for partners, it's going to make it easier for them because, if you're going to purchase something from one place is a lot easier than trying to augment and, stitch together all these tools that may or may not play nice. So I do think the MSP is going to be the ultimate winner. And I think, once again, it's adapt or die, right? You have to evolve or get left behind. And I think, kudos to Huntress for doing that and figuring that out.
Well, and kudos to them for figuring out how to do it cost effectively. I think they hit it right on the nose with the approach that they're taking. But even Rich, it even says in here, and I found this number quite staggering, because even just if you're just focusing on application processes, that's still a pretty big undertaking, right? It says in here that they observe 6 billion unique processes in a 2-week period. That's a lot of processes to keep an eye on.
It's an incredible number, isn't it? They are monitoring and assessing 6 billion processes every 2 weeks currently, and that will probably go up. That's unique processes, by the way. 6 billion unique processes. It's kind of incredible.
Yeah, I didn't even know there could be 6 billion unique processes. That's a lot. That's a lot. So kudos to them. Best of luck with it. And I've seen a lot of Huntress stuff. I've seen them talk about a lot of things. They seem very, very effective at what they do. Very, very smart folks. So this is definitely something you're going to want to check out. And if you want to learn more about this, we're just kind of giving our thoughts high level here, kind of telling you a little bit about it. But there's a lot more details in the articles. We're going to put links to all of these in the show page for episode 236. So go to channelpronetwork.com, find the episode page for 236. You'll see all the links there. Also, if you're on your phone, if you open up the description area, links should be in there as well. If you're on YouTube, hit like, hit subscribe, hit the bell, hit thumbs up, hit there's a million things on YouTube you gotta press them all except for the thumbs down. Don't press that one. You're thinking about the thumbs down, don't do it. And I'll wait. We're going to pause the show, go leave a comment, leave a star rating on the podcast, which go ahead. And we're not gonna move on until you do it. So we'll wait. Go on, go leave a rating, go. Okay, we'll assume that you're doing that while we push forward. But if you open up the description area on YouTube as well, after you leave a comment and a good rating, we'll put the links in there for you as well to check out. So thank you for doing that. And also tell a friend to do the same, because that's important too. We got one more news story that we're going to talk about, and that is Ingram Micro. They've got a new membership program for well, it says growth focused cloud partners. Like, is there really an opposite of that, Rich? Are there like rank focused cloud partners?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are people who are more aggressive about growth in the cloud than others, and that sort of segment of their channel is really sort of the main target for what we're going to be talking about here. And so Ingram obviously is a giant cloud distributor. What they announced this week is a new membership program, optional membership program for their cloud partners. And as context for this, about 18 months ago, Ingram introduced a customer success program, and you will hear about customer success or partner success programs at other distributors and vendors. And the idea basically is we've got this team of people who are not going to try to sell anybody anything. Their job is just to help the partners be more successful so that they grow, and and ultimately that it benefits them and it benefits us too. But these are not like salespeople. So they created this customer success team for their cloud partners, and they kind of broke up their cloud partners into several groups. There are the really big top partners, and there's another level down, very important high volume partners. And those partners all got very kind of personalized, customized kind of attention. Some of them got dedicated customer success managers. Pretty much all of the same resources or kinds of resources were available to all of the other smaller cloud partners, but on more of a one-to-many kind of basis. Well, some of those smaller cloud partners are in a hurry to get big, basically, and they want the kind of attention that only those bigger partners are getting. And so what Ingram announced this week is a program, a paid program for their cloud partners called Ultra. And Ultra basically comes with sort of 4 pillars of benefits. One that they call insights. They will approach you once a month, and they will kind of point out what they believe are cross-sell and upsell opportunities within your accounts. They'll give you some renewal rate data. They will point out what they call high-risk customers, so maybe customers who have purchased cloud software but haven't actually been using it yet. And maybe a renewal date is coming up. That's something you want to know about. they'll kind of show you, where you stand on certifications for your staff, and they will benchmark all of this. So if you want to see how you're doing on your renewal rates, for example, versus other peers out there, they will get you that reporting data on that. Second bucket they call automation. That basically the star of the automation bucket is a free 2-user license to CloudBlue PSA, which is their PSA solution at Harmony. You also get the ability to introduce a white labeled self-serve cloud subscription management tool. So if your customers just want to add another user to Microsoft 365 or whatever, they don't have to call you. You don't have to do it for them. They can now do that on their own using a white label tool. And then you will get some integration assistance from Ingram as well. So they have a whole bunch of integrations with CRM systems, PSAs, ERP systems. Everybody has access to those. But if you're an Ultra member, they will actually help you implement those integrations. In what they call the know-how bucket, you get either through interactive webinars or in one-to-one engagements, you actually get access to a team of consultants that they have with them who can talk to you about demand generation or your own customer success strategies. If you want to get help from an expert about how to generate leads, for example, that comes with this program here. You don't have to go out and pay somebody pay somebody more to do that. And then there is what they call the exclusives category, which is free training vouchers, some incentive programs that only go out to the Ultra members. Now, as I said, this is a paid program. It is available to anybody through the Ingram Cloud Marketplace. It costs $199 a month. For a yearly subscription. You have to buy at least a 1-year subscription to this. Ingram says that for most of their partners, the money you save with those free PSA licenses is going to be more than the $199 a month. And the training vouchers, the personal, they're saying this is a pretty good value, but partners will have to kind of decide for themselves. But for $199 a month, 1-year minimum, you get a whole bunch of stuff that only the big cloud guys got before.
And at the end of the 1 year, are they going to automatically renew you for 3 years?
Good question. Not if they listen to ChannelPro Weekly.
So I'm not an MSP. I don't know if I can assess the value of this. Antoine, what do you think?
I think it's pretty interesting. I think that for the smaller partners, this can be a potential win. I mean, obviously, it's interesting enough. You're going to have to pay to be a part of this program. I do see that. I see the reasoning behind it, because obviously they want serious partners, especially if they're going to, try to go after that market that's already very small to begin with. Well, not small as in size, but small as in, where they are in their business, I guess. So I do think that, you're starting to see this kind of shift for some of these major players that are now starting to target, these 1-man, 2-man, 5-man operations, because they're leaving money on the table essentially by not going after them. So I think, for Ingram, it does, once again, a little hint of genius of, obviously now going after this target market where there's probably a lot of revenue that they're just not capturing. So
well, it all seems a little bit to me like a ploy to get people to use the CloudBlue PSA as well.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to grow the numbers on that tool as well. And that tool, I don't know much about CloudBlue PSA. Is it a good PSA? Do you have any experience with it, Antoine?
No experience. Not even familiar with them until you guys had this article come up. So yeah, I'm actually kind of curious to see, because for our space, it's the ConnectWise, the Kaseas, the Datos or AutoTask, so it's interesting to see this another player emerging, especially in this way when you're looking at a big supplier or distributor such as Ingram. So
yeah. Interesting stuff. A lot of perks if you go down this path. It might make sense for you. We're gonna again throw you to the article to kind of read through all the details and link off to learn more about it. But it might be something that is of interest to many of our listening and viewing audience out there. And if it is, folks, if this is something that you kind of take advantage of, or you you try this out and it's great, hey, let us know that so we can kind of come back on the show and tell people kind of some experiences that we're hearing out there. We want to get the feedback from you. So Rich, we got one other story that we're going to get to. We're going to wrap news, but we're going to get to a story that I love these conversations because they're always interesting, because you get some people in the camp, they're like, I could never get rid of a customer. And then you have some people that are like, I could not get rid of a customer fast enough, but it's how and when and why to fire clients. Tell us a little bit about this story, where it came from, and we'll chat about it for a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you set it up that way, because that kind of is exactly where it came from. So the origin of this story goes back to the Cybersecurity Online Summit event that we did back in April, I think. And there was a session during that event in which some of the speakers were talking about firing clients. And I'm kind of watching the chat window while that's happening. And the partners, the folks in the audience, started debating with each other about whether, you should ever fire a client and under what circumstances. And I have to say, it surprised me a little bit that there were so many people who said, I never fire a client. Because I speak fairly regularly with managed services consultants, all of whom agree that under certain circumstances, you really kind of need to fire a client. And so we did an article that kind of followed up on that. The sources for the story were some of these consultants, all of whom agreed, you don't want to do this too quickly. It should be a last resort kind of a thing, and you want to do it in a very rational, fact-based kind of way, and not just decide I'm tired of that guy and I'm going to cut him loose, basically. But there are conditions when it's eventually going to make sense to sever your relationship with a customer, and that could be they're not treating your employees well. They are not paying their bills on time. They are not following the technology. You, as the trusted advisor, are kind of telling them what they need to do with technology, especially maybe security technology, and they're just not listening. They don't see the strategic value of IT. So there are reasons basically why eventually it might come to the point where you really do need to kind of let a partner go, and that's what the story is about. And the other thing, in addition to discussing those conditions and how to approach that process, one of the things that all the experts that we consulted with made a point of saying is, when and if you do come to the point of firing a client, make sure you do that in the most professional way possible, basically, and help them find somebody else. Make sure that they get any kind of intellectual property, password, whatever it is that they kind of need in order to continue managing their environment. Make sure they have that. Because even if it's not inconceivable that they could become a customer again somewhere down the road, but they could also be a source of referrals, or somebody could ask for feedback and so on. So you want to end that relationship on good terms, but it's not something that you should do as a hair trigger kind of reaction. But there are some times when you really do have to kind of say goodbye to a customer.
Antoine, I'm going to let you comment first.
I mean, I totally agree with it. I totally agree with everything you say, Rich. I mean, and here's the reality, one, be above it, right? With these relationships that MSPs have with their customers or their partners or their clients, in some cases, it can be a very emotionally taxing relationship, right? Because, us as, MSPs, a lot of us, when we started as technicians, right? Or we started as those one-man operations, where in the beginning of your business, you want to be available. And then over time, as your business evolves and changes, you start to realize, oh, wait, how am I going to scale and grow if I'm the only point of contact? I still have this issue today in my business where I have some legacy clients who literally will text me, and say, hey, I have this issue, when they're circumventing some of the processes. Now, over time, when you get to a certain point, you have to really evaluate the value of that relationship, right? Is that relationship continuing to help your business grow and thrive? Is that relationship mentally taxing to your employees? But the one thing I will say, though, when you kind of make that decision, and every person's business is different, sometimes you may not be in the financial position to let them go right away. And, but once you get to that point, I think the most important thing, is it's how you do it, right? Leave it better than what you found it. So if you're going to decide to fire a client, leave them better off than when you found them, whether that's linking them in with a provider that's a better fit, or maybe an MSP that's just starting their journey that can provide that, business owner to direct to customer, relationship. It's interesting because, we just recently experienced that where, we had a client that had been with us for 6 years and, they were small, and the relationship really changed because as I tried to enable my team and my staff to solve problems, they still wanted me to solve those problems. And, the way that we ultimately fired them was we basically raised their pricing because, as everybody has had to do over the last year, especially with like inflation, is we priced them out. So we did it in a very honorable way. And the good thing is we found them the right fit for them. And I think that you're right. That client could eventually grow up and become a client again. But more importantly, the one thing you don't want to do, you don't want to give them a reason to feel like, yeah, I'm glad I left that MSP. They were terrible, right? But also you don't want a bad review, right? Because brand reputation and brand management that'll cost you triple the revenue that you're throwing away there. Now I do also think that addition by subtraction, I'm a big believer in it. And if you can make the fiscal sense of getting rid of these problematic clients or clients that aren't producing the revenue, absolutely do it. Because one, it's going to make your technicians less stressed. And also it's going to help your business grow. Like you're still growing from that. So I think that that's the thing you have to keep in mind. But once again, you want to be professional. You want to you don't want to be emotional about this decision. And you definitely, absolutely always want to be better and always above it. So.
Very, very true. And it's important when you're working with other businesses, like there's a line in here that I think says it all. And that's, your customer is in business to make money and to be profitable, right? They're not going to do things or keep doing things that is unprofitable for them. Correct. They shouldn't expect the same from you, right? If you're losing money on them, if they're not profitable and it's not, you're not a charity, right? Like, right. You might be if your business is a charity, well, then you're doing the right thing. Most likely you are not a charity. And you should, that doesn't necessarily mean you fire them right away, but you need to do the things that are required to make the customer profitable. If that is so possible. And sometimes that just might be a conversation like, hey, we're not making any money off of you. We're losing money. This is not sustainable. They understand what that might mean, and they might be willing to work with you. So that's, I think it's all about having an honest conversation, right? Honest conversation with yourself and honest conversation with your customer. And I think that that's the reason why some of these, breakups, they go so poorly, because as either I've stopped being honest with myself by saying, you know what, I'm just going to continue to do this for nothing, or I'm no longer communicating that to the customer. And I think it's about putting everybody on the same page. And it's okay to part ways. People break up all the time, and you can still break up and still have that mutual respect. It doesn't have to be a blaze of glory, when things go sideways or go apart. The other part I will say though too, especially in the age of cyber, we've had some clients that are like, look, we're not doing this managed SOCs or this EDR because we don't see the value behind it. And one of the things that we've started to do is we've started to set standards, and we've said, look, at the end of the day, if a breach occurs on my watch, you're coming after me regardless. So you want to be able to hold me accountable, but I have to be able to hold you accountable as well as my partner, so. Very, very good point. Very, very good point. And, if you are trying to convince a customer to part ways, just renew them for 3 years instead of 1 year, and don't tell them about it. Lock them in. Just lock them in. Lock them in. That's it. Well, good stuff. Lots of really good advice in here. I highly encourage everyone to go and read this article. They're going to definitely take away some good sound tidbits from some very, very smart people like Sean Walsh, Emmanuel Palachuk, and others. So definitely go and check that out. Now is a good time to take a break. And why are we going to take a break? Because we are going to be joined by Stephanie Hallford and Michael Nordquist from Intel. We're going to be talking about vPro. We're going to be talking about the current market conditions for in the endpoint market and all kinds of really, really interesting stuff like that. I guarantee it's going to be a fascinating and excellent discussion. So stick around for that. We will be right back. And welcome back to part 2 of ChannelPro Weekly. System administrators have come to heavily rely on many of the technologies Intel packs into its vPro platform processors. And since 2020 spurred an exodus from central offices to remote work, technologies like vPro that enable things like remote configuration and management, as well as advanced security, have become increasingly more important. Well, here to discuss some of the newest changes in the vPro platform and current conditions in the endpoint market is Stephanie Hallford, Intel's Vice President and General Manager of Business Client Platforms, and Michael Nordquist, Vice President and General Manager, Business Client Product Planning and Architecture at Intel. Welcome to the both of you.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
And welcome, Michael.
Thank you as well. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
I'm also very excited to announce that Michael Nordquist is now our new award winner. He has won an award for longest job title here on ChannelPro Weekly. So congratulations, Michael.
Yeah, it's amazing. I really worked hard on that to figure out how I can make it as long as possible. You should see my business card. I had to get bigger business cards just to fit it all in.
Is it like those giant checks, that they give out like at golf tournaments?
Yeah, exactly. I'm a big guy, so I can kind of get away with it, right? But it doesn't fit my pocket anymore or anything like that. I have to bring a briefcase just for the cards.
Well, awesome. Well, I'll have to take a look at that here in a little while. I'd love to see a briefcase that size to carry cards around in. And Stephanie, it's great to have you back with us as well. Usually when we have Intel stuff to talk about, we try to get you on because you know all and see all at Intel. But for those who may not have caught some of those previous episodes, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit more about you and what you do.
Sure. So always enjoy coming and talking to you and Rich. Lots of fun. I'm coming to you today from Santa Clara. I'm based in Portland, but down here this week. And again, it's probably my second time in headquarters office in, a couple years. So we are definitely in the midst of remote work. So it's exciting for us to see how our vPro product has become sort of integral. I mean, we couldn't have predicted this pandemic, but it seems to be fitting the needs quite well. But just by way of background for those that I have not met before, I run our business client group. It's our commercial segment, kind of center of excellence in our client group at Intel. And we are uniquely responsible for the vPro platform, which is basically built for businesses. And it is added manageability, security, and some of the unique needs that businesses require. My team is based all over, but primarily in the Oregon and Santa Clara and Folsom areas. And Mike,
Stephanie,
go for it.
I've got to ask you a question here. I've been dying to ask. And I'll set it up this way. About 6 months ago, I was just spinning the dial on TV, and I came across an episode of NCIS, and immediately one of the characters said something about Gibbs, a character, and I thought, I know somebody with a dog named Gibbs, like named after that character. And for folks who saw you, I think this was your first appearance on the podcast. It was this wonderful, you were working from home, and in the background, in the middle of that conversation, Gibbs the dog kind of lopes into the frame, gets up on the couch, takes a nap. So I got to check in on Gibbs. Everything good with Gibbs?
That is hilarious. The loping is what he does. We call him Benjamin Button because he was just born old. He's only 3 years old, but he moves as if he's ancient. And unlike his namesake, Gibbs on NCIS, who is quite active, our Gibbs is, he's a loper. That's what he does. So he lopes and he naps and he snuggles. Those are his probably, best traits.
Well, that's awesome. Glad to hear that Gibbs is doing well. Now, Michael, I'd like to turn attention to you to have you tell us a little bit more about you, what you do, and if you have any cuddly pets that are ancient.
I don't have any that are ancient, but yeah. So Mike Nordquist, as I said before, I've been in Intel 22 years. So I've been here a while, almost out of college, was a design engineer, in college, electrical engineer, got into engineering, moved over to Intel, and have done a variety of different things from the, sales side to product marketing side. I went back into engineering for a while, did some architecture. In the last 7 years, I've really been focused on our business PCs. So what do we need to build in our future PCs? And I spend a lot of my time with our end customers to try to figure out what are their pain points, what problems are they actually trying to solve, and then a lot of time with our partners as well that help us bring these things to market. So Microsoft, Google, Dell, HP, Lenovo, how do we bring these things to life? And it tends to be really focused on security and manageability, right? Those tend to be the big differentiators on the business side of the house. That's where I kind of spend the time. In my free time, I got the COVID dog a little over a year ago, right? I've got 3 kids and a wife. Once they broke my wife, I was a goner, right? So I've got a Labradoodle now named Kyla, right? And great dog. Labradoodles are awesome dogs. Not super well behaved, but, great disposition, great dog overall.
So with 3 kids, I can't imagine you have a lot of time for hobbies, but you never know. Some people are into some stuff. What other kind of things do you like to do for fun when you're not architecting?
Gosh, that's a good question. We do some hiking, but I think that's partially kind of the kids, right? I got an 8-year-old son, 11 and 13-year-old daughters. And so it's trying to get them exercise. Like, hey, we're going to go for a 5-mile hike, right? And usually it requires some bribing, but since I'm in Portland, Oregon, there's a bunch of great places within an hour away. And then usually there's some food and potentially a microbrew afterwards when completing the hike. So,
well, very fun, very cool. So there's been a lot of things going on in terms of the vPro platform. I know Intel recently launched their 12th generation core processors, and I'm sure we're going to get into that a little bit. And we're also going to be talking a little bit about the endpoint market and some of the things that have been changing there. Some are obvious, some probably not quite so obvious. So, Rich, do you want to kind of help set up the conversation?
Yeah, and I was thinking about this before. This might, in some ways, be almost too obvious a place to start. I mean, vPro has been around for a long time, but maybe just to kind of kick things off, I mean, refresh our memory. Everyone listening, watching right now is familiar with vPro to some degree, but I mean, what is that, and why did you folks introduce it?
Yeah, it is about 16 years old, and in the very, we had, I think, the 15th anniversary last fall. So we're getting close to 16 years. And it was introduced really to initially in order to provide IT and IT administrators ability to manage and reach PCs anywhere, even when the OS was not available. And, 15 years ago, the OS was much less stable. You had blue screens were kind of a regular part of life. And so the ability to be able to reach those PCs and wake, patch, address any concerns at that time was incredibly important. Fast forward to now, even though times have changed, the OS is much more stable. Obviously, the pandemic and many other realities, a global workforce, IT administrators being based in Salt Lake City, but supporting folks in Sydney or Dubai or wherever it may be. So the ability to reach and update and keep secure that those PCs anywhere in the world is just as real of a need today, if not more so. And I think with the cybersecurity concerns that have really started to hit, perhaps that's even added additional urgency. And so we've really upped our focus, not just on the remote manageability, but on the security features too. And that's an area that, Mike, who's on with me today, is really our expert. He's our resident expert on, security, PC security, and works very closely with the other players in the ecosystem that we need to be working with for anything to really come through in an effective means. Microsoft, our OEM partners, many of our ISV partners that are, security experts, et cetera.
Do you folks have a feel at all for the degree to which channel partners out there are prioritizing buying vPro equipped desktops, laptops, et cetera, for their customers? Is that something that they appreciate the value, they're taking advantage of it, or is there some room there for partners to really kind of tap into vPro?
Well, we've seen a lot of there's a strong strategic alignment with many of our channel partners who have the ability to provide end-to-end solutions on top of our platform. So it's really a better together story. So we found a great deal of interest. We work with, whether it be the CrowdStrikes of the world, an Accenture who's, managing large enterprises, or a CDW who's getting into, more and more of the services space. But at the same time, there's always room for more. I think the blend of software and hardware is really where the opportunity lies. And so partnering with ecosystem players and experts in the field and service providers who really understand the needs of those end users is a crucial part of our strategy. And so that from day one has been really a key part of our both go-to-market and our product planning is how do we work together with players that add value to us and we can add value to them, with the end customer in mind.
I'd like to ask that kind of a similar question to Antoine as well. So Antoine, when you're outfitting your customers, do you rely on vPro, and do you prioritize buying PCs that have vPro?
So, most of the PCs we have acquired actually do have vPro, coincidentally, but we actually haven't really utilized it. That's why I'm very interested in, what Stephanie's talking about, because I'm like, wow, this is probably something we can add to our service offering, or at least make what we're doing day to day, easier. Obviously, with this whole focus, as everybody knows, that cybersecurity is the new buzzword. It's not the new buzzword. It's the old buzzword that'll just stay new. It's something that, obviously we're just always trying to have that extra little bit of a security competitive advantage, I guess you could say.
So we're about 5 months after the introduction of the latest vPro generation at this point, and I want to spend a lot of time on the security enhancements in that latest generation of vPro. But before we get there, from my point of view, the big 3 pillars around vPro are management, performance, and security. So let's kind of just talk a little bit about the management and the performance piece of that. What kind of changes, what kind of improvements are people going to see in those latest vPro chips?
Yeah, we've just come out with our Alder Lake, launched, which is our 12th gen. And what you see is a continuous, improvement in our security and manageability features. I'll have Mike go into that in more detail. But we also took a big jump in our performance, and we've introduced a hybrid architecture, which really allows us to do more with the entire platform. So we're able to, for instance, in a security environment, we're able to direct traffic to the VPU or outside of the CPU and utilize the CPU to really perform perhaps more crisis or more front end behaviors, whereas security checks and all of the things that need to be going on in the background can be diverted to another part of the architecture. So we've really taken a big leap forward in this last generation, and the results have been excellent. We've found that most of our OEM partners are, just selling it out the door. If anything, the bigger issue has been broader supply chain, supply chain outside of our control that have, for instance, created small, small supply issues, whether it be an IC, a $1 IC, et cetera. But the step ahead that we've been able to achieve with this disaggregation has really allowed us to kind of get creative on what else can we do to take advantage of the ability to divert behaviors in the PC, at the same time being able to add new security opportunities without affecting performance. I think one person that, I think it was originally had said, look, security, you could add all the security in the world you wanted, but how do you do it without degrading the user experience? That's that balance. And so that's what this new hybrid architecture is really focused on, is how do we do everything that we want to do with remote manageability, with security, with graphics, et cetera, but not affect that end user performance and end user experience, which, as we all know, is even more challenging now that we're sitting in a hybrid reality.
Yeah, I guess the other things I would add to, I just add a couple different things there. Stephanie hit the hybrid architecture, right? So performance cores, efficient cores, being able to swap between them and have a bunch of performance, that's always great. People want more performance, that's good. Bringing up the level of graphics, especially on the desktop side, it was a huge integrated graphics performance boost on that side of the house. And then there's a bunch of little things. Part of what vPro is, it's our commercial class platform, right? So I think people kind of go in and are like, is this feature in? Is it not in? How do I know when I go to the OEM? I'm not sure. That's kind of what vPro was meant to do was, hey, if you see the vPro sticker, it's in there, right? You want the best security, you just buy vPro. It's easy. It's hardware shield in that space. You don't have to go and check the spec sheet. Is it right? I just got it in there. So we've got that performance. And on the performance, the other thing people don't think about, especially in this hybrid world, is like, you've got Thunderbolt 4, right? I'm now using dual monitors. I mean, you go back 3 or 4 years ago, almost no one was doing dual monitors, right? It was like, I got some crazy person doing, creator stuff and they use 2 monitors, but you wouldn't walk around and see multiple monitors. And now it's kind of the default, right? Everyone has either a huge monitor or they have dual displays. In some cases, they're 4K, right? Because that's how they experience the world. And so having things like Thunderbolt that can support 4K dual stream, that docking capability, that becomes super important. And being able to walk into the office now from hoteling and just easily plug into that Thunderbolt dock there, that becomes huge as well. And then people start talking about, well, hey, performance, that can also be around my Wi-Fi and my connectivity. Well, does vPro do anything about that? Yeah, we have Wi-Fi 6E that brings in. And so that gives you a different band. It's not at the, crowded 2.4 or 5 gigahertz space, it's up at 6. And so you have a lot more bandwidth and spectrum there that you can actually go play with. And we were hearing people that were in very metropolitan areas where they were actually having problems with capability. And then we even looked at that and said, hey, even if I have decent bandwidth, how do I get the most out of it, right? How do I actually prioritize? We're on a Zoom call. I want a priority to be on my Zoom call, not on some other background task. And so we brought in this, what's called Intel Connectivity Performance Suite, that actually allows us to automatically just set, like where you want the quality of service to be, right? The end user doesn't have to really do anything. You just set it up once and boom, it's going to default to that thing. It was actually a company that we acquired that originally did it for gaming. And then we looked at it and said, hey, this would actually be great for our enterprise customers as well. So a ton of performance stuff. It's not just about like, yes, great, we got the CPU, it's awesome, right? We bumped up the graphics. I think people kind of expect us to do that, and we took big leaps in Alder Lake. But then some of the other things you don't think about, like, hey, docking, my display capability, that's how I see the world. That becomes pretty important. And the Wi-Fi of what's my connectivity, right? I mentioned I have 3 kids. My wife's working from home as well. Like, I want higher priority when everyone's on that. How do I make sure I have that great experience as people view me from the world? And then from a security perspective, we took pretty big leaps depending on what you look at. And all of it's about being built in. I think before it was, hey, we've got a cool capability, but you got to do X, Y, and Z and maybe need another tool to do this, right? We got a ton of feedback. People hate that, right? Like, oh my gosh, if you're going to tell me I need another tool, kind of not interested, right? Now, if you can integrate with something I already have or just works out of the box, I like those things, right? And we went from 3 years ago where if you went and talked to an IT shop or a business, they're all about a castle and a moat, right? I'm going to get people on site, right? And then I'm going to have my whole IT infrastructure and my network operations, making sure no one can get in, right? And that's how I'm actually going to protect people, right? And now you look at it like, apparently I'm the only one in the office, right? There used to be about 400 people here and there's like 5 now, which I'm one of. But that's not the standard. It's, hey, I'm working from home. I'm not actually VPNing, to anything, unless it's maybe a legacy tool that's doing an expense report or something like that. Most of the time I'm connecting directly to that application that's hosted in the cloud. And so you've seen people switch, which was a buzzword before, which was zero trust, right? And if you weren't a security nerd, no one knew what it meant. No one knew what ransomware was. And those are now becoming kind of commonplace. Like, hey, let's assume I'm not behind this firewall. I'm not behind the moat that's at the office. Do I have technologies that are built in? And so we brought a host of them in as you look across our desktop and notebook side of the house, where it's like, hey, can you actually protect me against a pretty common browser attack, right? Where we come in and they do control flow attacks, right? And so that's something we built in. We work with Microsoft. It's just in there. You don't have to do anything. You just get protection that software alone can't protect you against, right? We brought in and we've said, hey, we've seen people start actually attacking firmware, and below the OS. I don't know how to configure that. Can you work with the OEMs in that space to just enable that out of the box? And then make sure we have a secure handoff to that OS, like the Microsoft OS, without me having to do anything and configure it. So yes, out of the box, we got those capabilities. And then thirdly, I think you heard a little bit before, was around or what we call threat detection technology, which is just about could you make my CrowdStrikes or Defender or some of these ISVs better? I would think because you guys are below the OS, you have access to telemetry and behavioral information that's probably pretty interesting that could help diagnose that there may be a problem that exists. That's on its own, it's not going to replace your vendor, but could you work with that vendor? And then those models could just get updated through the standard model that CrowdStrike or Defender has. I don't have to do anything. I just get the latest version of my EPP vendor or EDR vendor, and boom, I'm ready to go. I just get better protection than if the hardware doesn't have it. And so those are all things that we built in, and some of them started on 11th gen on mobile side, but not across the board. And really with 12th gen, we brought them across the board. So it's built in, it's that below the OS, it's working with the OS, and then it's working with those software vendors that are the traditional ones we think about from a security perspective, right? And again, it's all about out of the box, easy enablement, easy support, right? Because really a lot of the feedback we got is like, hey, all this configuration and provisioning, it's just too difficult, right? Even though there's a cool value add at the end of the day, man, I don't know if the efforts, I'm going to get the reward where, hey, if you get it out of the box, that's awesome. I don't have to do much. I like that, right? So that's really where our focus has been the last few generations. I spend my time upstream. So I'm, having these conversations 3 or 4 years ago, if you ask me what the official name of the technology is now, I can't even always remember it. But I can tell you what the code word is, right? I can tell you what it was, named 3 or 4 years ago.
Hey, Michael, I do have a question. I
probably rolled a little bit long there, but.
Well, I do have a question, Michael. Like, how are
Sure.
you able to figure out these other, like, I guess, technology, partners of it, like the CrowdStrikes, that you're actually trying to make your product work and having that out of the box experience? Like, how are you guys like figuring out, because obviously there's new vendors every day, right? And there's always something new coming up, and especially in the security space, I feel like there's a new security product or solution or company every day. How are you all trying to be proactive as this landscape is actively changing,
Yeah, well, I think what we do is, we start with kind of a base that they can take and just plug in if they want to, right? So we do our own machine learning models in the space. We make it super easy from an API perspective of, hey, if you want to just take this and integrate it in, you just write to these APIs. It's relatively easy for them to go do. Some of the more aggressive vendors, it's kind of like start to finish from the time they've signed up to, hey, we've got your stuff to the end. It's like a 2-3 month development cycle. It's pretty quick for them to actually go do. But it depends on how far they want to go. Do they want to do some of their own models in it, right? Because some people might just say, hey, I want to do some memory scanning capability. I want to offload onto just your GPU because I just want more performance. And if I run on the CPU, I notice a user experience, so I've just turned it off. Now that I have it, that will help me. Some people are saying, hey, crypto mining is my problem, right? I really am interested in your crypto miner detector. Can you give it to me? And then they actually might take and they might do some of their own AI modeling to where it's more, proprietary or unique to them. So we give it, if you want to do more effort in it, you can. If you want to take it out of the box, it's going to make it better. I mean, most of these vendors, they're all connected to the cloud. And so they're just, hey, the more telemetry and behavioral information I can get, the better decisions that I can make, right? So it by itself, it's not the end all, right? It's kind of a side dish, but taken together with a lot of these different factors, it just gives them one more tool in their toolbox to make better decisions, right? I see this might look weird. Maybe I want to do a little more inspection of what's happening on that PC. I might not automatically trigger and say, yep, this is absolutely ransomware, go automatically do this. They can do that if they want, but in most cases, they'll say, some behavior looks suspicious there. I'm on this PC that Stephanie's running over here. I'm actually going to do a little more inspection to see if there might actually be something wrong with it. What are some of the other things that I want to check? And the level of automation really depends on who the software vendor is.
So I think
Antoine, you were also asking how do we find those partners? And we have a team that is focused exclusively on channel partners. So we have a team that, really is, and within that team, there, are security experts that are really out there meeting, talking to, and, integrating at conferences. Mike was at RSA recently. So, a lot of it is through your typical, events and, and just outreach. Intel's such a well-known entity in the business space that we find a lot of them come to us. But, we're always out there reading, meeting, greeting, and trying to figure out where, we would find synergistic partners.
Yeah, I don't want to put anyone on the spot. There's no reason why you would be particularly familiar with this integration, but one of the integration partners you guys highlighted on the launch day for these new vPro processors was a company very familiar, enormously familiar to our audience, which is ConnectWise. I don't know if either of you can kind of speak to ConnectWise, and they're drawing on telemetry from your chips in their RMM software. That might be kind of a concrete example for how these integrations work, if you're familiar with that at all.
Mike, you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't the one negotiating with ConnectWise or going the deal. We actually have a team, as Stephanie kind of mentioned before, but they were in the crypto mining space of, hey, this looks like a great example of a gap we have where this can actually help round out our solution. And so really sitting down and engaging with them and saying, hey, here's a detector that we have. Here's what you can actually use. It actually looks at some of our CPU performance counters that we have and looks at that behavior and says, hey, I'm starting to see this weird behavior. In the crypto mining example, it starts to look for some kind of encryption things that are happening that maybe look a little suspect. Like, why are so many of those things happening? And it's below the OS, so they can't really hide them. We can see them relatively quick and trigger it and say, this looks suspicious. Like, hey, we want to do something about that. What do we want to do? Do we want to quarantine the system? Do we want to notify that something's going on? Do we want to potentially even disconnect it from the network, that it might mitigate, some other problems that might go somewhere else, right? So that's an example of some of the things that we've done.
You're only going to know this by the code name, but there's this one particular security technology that you folks talked about when these chips launch, which is the anomalous behavior detection capability, which is, I think, a lot of what you're kind of talking about here. So just kind of explain to folks what that is and what that kind of adds to the picture security wise.
Yeah, it really starts because on some of these things, you're looking for signatures. You're looking for, hey, I've seen this bit of code before, right? But at some level, and you see when you go talk to most of the security vendors at this point, that's not good enough. It's all about behavior. Like, you got to start looking at what is weird behavior, and you can't just assume that you've seen it before. You should still do that, because a lot of the code that's written, it's taking chunks from old code. There's not actually that much really unique from scratch, but you really have to start behaviorally looking at these things, right? And that's the anomalous behavior detection that we brought in that says, let's start looking for things that we think are weird behavior, and we tune those things, right? So we take from the national list of all these different attacks that are out in the wild, and we start running them through our model, right? And we start to say, hey, are we catching these things? What are they looking? We really tune that model to those things, so we can start to see that behavior of things that they commonly do that are consistent in that way, and then flag them that, hey, we think this is an item, and that helps drive up the efficacy dramatically as you're kind of looking at these kind of attacks that are coming in. So anomalous behavior detection is something that we just brought in. You're right, absolutely, with 12th Gen. You're well read. I love it. And that helps us really dial up the behavioral aspect of this, not just looking for previous attacks or code attacks, things that have happened, or doing memory scanning. It's really dialing up the behavioral aspect of it.
And what's really kind of interesting about that to me, that the concept of behavior-based security and watching behavior for anomalous patterns, and then alerting potentially, that's actually kind of familiar from the security software world. I'm not familiar with it, seeing it in the hardware world as well. And this, I guess, kind of gets to that whole hardware and software better together kind of message, that the companies that have been doing software-based, behavior-based security now have this additional source of information to factor into what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting when you look at it. It's like a lot of this stuff just started with an EPV vendor, right? Endpoint protection kind of vendor that sits on top of the OS and looks at some things. Now, and it scans as you go down, but as the environment evolves, right, you start to see stuff getting in underneath the OS, right? So the OS now, like Microsoft, brings in something like virtualization-based security, where they put a virtual layer underneath, and they take your secrets and actually put it in a different virtual container so people can't have access. That offers great protection. Okay, but if you're an attacker, what do you want to do next? I want to get below into that, VMM that's sitting there. How do I actually go do that? Right. And so they look at ways where they attack the firmware, they attack different things. Well, that's a problem if you still have that traditional model and say, well, I can only view things that are on top of the OS. I have no way to get underneath that and actually see what's happening. And so I think that's a place that Intel comes in and says, hey, I can help with that, right? I can give you information, APIs to actually see below the OS, because we've even seen attacks where they'll build a separate container and a virtual container on that is actually attacking the system, but the OS container itself can't see it, right? And so this gives you more insight into those things that are actually happening. And you start working on those principles that are just software, right? And you just start moving them down, right? It's like, okay, how do I make sure my configuration, not just of my OS, but of my BIOS is updated, right? And make sure that it actually looks good. Okay, how do I update it, right? Again, we have great methodologies to do that on the OS side of the house and app side of the house. Let's bring it down at the BIOS level. And so we'll work with the, both Microsoft, whether it's their Windows update, or with the OEMs that have a lot of awesome tools about how they actually go and update their BIOS as well. So it's really taking a lot of that methodology and kind of strategy that we've used above the OS. And it's really just bringing it down and applying it to the different levels underneath the OS. And for us, because we have those hooks in there and we generate a lot of the reference BIOS code that goes in, which you hear called UFI that comes in, we can actually go scale that into the industry, into our OEMs that are out there. And then obviously the hardware hooks and some of the information that we can get off those systems, making those API available to actually see what's happening in the space.
Well, I think this is definitely something MSPs can benefit from, because obviously, being that trusted advisor and having this knowledge, it makes it easier for us to continue to sell security solutions to our clients. But it also helps us, to continue. And even though the margins aren't the world's greatest in hardware, it allows for us to justify some of these major upgrades or, hardware refreshes, or even just some of the components of like the security stack in general. I think just having this knowledge here and just making the client always aware that, listen, it doesn't just end at the OS level, I think is remarkable. So
yeah, and like I said, a lot of these things you can only get with a new PC, right? I think people have this thing of like, oh, I have a security problem, I gotta buy software. That's the answer to it, and it's not. I mean, even if you go talk to like Microsoft, the best protection you can get is to make sure you have updated hardware and software, because some of these capabilities exist. I mean, I talked about control flow enforcement technology that we have, like they couldn't solve it with software only, so we needed hardware. I can't go backwards and put in hardware, into a 4-year-old PC. I've got to have new hardware to actually go do that. Some of the hooks that we're putting in at the, the BIOS and hooks into the BIOS, I can't always go backwards, right? I try to as much as I can if it's software only, but some of those hooks I can't. Hey, as I bring in things like threat detection, I'm bringing in additional detectors that just didn't exist on the old systems, right? And so you have some coverage. It's not like you're exposed with the old systems, but with the new stuff that has new capabilities, right? That just makes it better in this space. So I think, as you look forward, hey, we try to always have something that's a little bit of a sell up, and there's a little bit better security in vPro, right? You want the best security, vPro. That's what I was saying earlier with Hardware Shield. But it's also just like, hey, new PCs, they're going to have better capabilities just baseline than what you could buy 4 years ago, right? If you're still running a 5 or 6-year-old PC, there's only so much I can do, right? I can't go backwards and add hardware, right?
Right. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, like, a lot of us will face is, clients have been conditioned, maybe because we've conditioned them this way, to really just care about the specs, right? Processing power, memory, those finite things that you think that's all that a computer really has, versus some of these other, value adds from the security, the management layer and component. Because, somebody might think, a Gen 10 or a Gen 9 is sufficient if it's an i7 and it has all the specs that they need to run their day-to-day programs, but obviously missing the boat on that. Going with this Gen 12 vPro can actually be the security differentiator that could protect their business, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. As we go through it, like, hey, it's got these different hooks. And I think that's one of the challenges we always face, right? Because, you talk to a PC purchasing person, they're like, ask them about security, and they've been conditioned of like, it's got a TPM, right? That's great. That's one checkbox. Yes, they all have TPMs. But it's like, hey, what are the other things that I need to think about as I look through? What are the other considerations? And whether you realize it or not, when you make a PC purchase decision, you're making a security decision, right? And people aren't wired necessarily to think that way. It's like, I got my list from my CISO. If it was on that list, I'm good, right? And a lot of times the CISOs have been conditioned to, hey, I'm looking at a broader software thing. So really getting, educating those CISOs, the conversations of what are some of the things that are coming in from the hardware vendors as well. What things do they bring? And that's some, even with the threat detection, those are companies that they talk to, whether it's Defender and what they're doing on an E5 solution or something like that from Microsoft, or CrowdStrike, or some of the other vendors that we were just talking about with like ConnectWise, right? We've got support in those things, having those conversations. That's part of what I'll spend my time with, and then some of Stephanie's broader team spends a lot more time than I do, with some of our partners and vendors out there.
Stephanie, I would be remiss if I didn't step back and ask sort of a bigger picture question here about the endpoint market, because you folks at Intel have as good a view of that as anybody out there right now. And there's obviously a lot of talk in the channel and the media about endpoint sales maybe coming back to earth a little bit after 2 pretty spectacular years. Supply chain issues persist. Recession fears are sort of looming off there in the distance. And yet every time this topic comes up, I keep going back to a story we ran in ChannelPro just within the last few weeks. And it was based on research from an organization called NextThink that went out and scrutinized 3.12 million devices, PCs, from 457 different businesses, and found that 60% of them are, for one reason or another, not compatible with Windows 11. Now, Windows 10 is going to be supported for a little over 3 years still by Microsoft. So this is not like an urgent upgrade priority for the folks in our audience here. But even after all of the endpoint sales that we've seen in the last 2 years, there's a lot of hardware out there that's going to need to get refreshed in the next 2-3 years. So, I mean, what is your maybe near term, but also longer term view at Intel on the endpoint market?
Yeah, I mean, it's very robust. I mean, we're optimistic. I would say the business and commercial, sectors have remained very resilient. I think consumer is where we have seen, I think, more immediate reaction to some of the geopolitical, some of the monetary policy, some of those changes that have been happening, in the last 6 months have definitely, had taken a bit of a toll more on consumer. But our commercial segment remains incredibly strong. And I think you're right. As I think there's become more, as we have seen, leap years in improvements both in the hardware and in Windows, and our work with how our hardware takes advantage of some of the new features in Microsoft's OS. I think that's become more widely understood, that the interplay that Mike was referring to of the hardware needing to keep up with the software in order to take advantage of some of that software goodness. That interplay, I think, is more understood now. So we do see a lot of resiliency in the commercial market. We've also seen, a big, I think, sea change in, I mean, no one can run a business on a mobile phone. The need for a PC has become increasingly clear. And I think all of us that have, worked through this hybrid environment have realized how important the PC is for truly being productive, as well as communicating. I mean, it's become the main source of communication medium for families, talking to the grandparents, etc. So we've seen that the need for a PC, if anything, has become more acknowledged, and the unique capabilities of a PC versus something like a phone, which is a great companion device, but they're very different. And so we've really seen a huge rebound in, I think, the awareness of what I need a PC for and what do I do with other devices that could be in parallel. And that's created, I think, a lot of buoyancy and keeps us very optimistic about the future, particularly, in the short term. I think the consumer segment will take a little bit more of a hit than commercial, but long term, we see that it's, a very, it's a very positive environment.
How much has the supply chain issues, do you think, been holding back PC sales in recent, let's say in just in 2022 in general?
Yeah, I don't know if I can quantify it, but it's certainly been a factor. And as I said, the factor has been really on some of the very small little parts, a $1, $2, embedded controller. There's pieces, that have really been frustrating mostly to many of our OEM partners who, it's a very complex business to try to get your PC out the door. And when, one $2 part is creating havoc with a $2,000 system, that can be incredibly frustrating. So it is certainly been a factor. We have, I think, Intel, with the breadth of our organization and the global, the global reach, we've been able to help quite a bit. We've gone in and tried to negotiate and make sure that there's supply chain fixes that we can impose. We've even looked at utilizing our own fabs to, try to help where possible. So we've gotten very creative, and we've all, as a whole, the industry, I think, is handling this much better. But I would argue, I think, certainly at the end of last year, it was a big frustration, particularly amongst many of our OEM partners who were having trouble building out the systems at the, at the pace at which they were being ordered.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's just our industry, right? Anyone that has electronics in their systems. I'm a car guy, so I'm always trying to, watch the car stuff. I mean, man, you want to see a mess? Go look at trying to get a desirable car right now, and just the supply chain nightmare over there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're just about out of time, but I can kind of leave this on kind of a interesting question to kind of excite people about what might be coming down the road, because a lot of exciting things are happening. Intel is building new fabs. You mentioned fabs. We know that some of those are coming, and they're going to see, smaller processes and newer processors and different processor designs. What give us a little bit of a taste of some exciting things coming from Intel in the next year?
Yeah, I mean, there's one, I mean, I would say, and this is, really going to play itself out in the next year, but the approval quite recently in the US of the CHIPS Act, which is going to enable us to be able to invest in, manufacturing, which, as we all know, you build a fab in Ohio, and the amount of investment that follows, either with supply chain or quite simply the construction, alone. Our CEO, Pat Gelsinger, loves to tell the story that someone, I can't remember, XYZ was complaining in another industry because, Intel was using all the cranes and all the cement trucks, in the Midwest. And, that's the level of kind of size and impact that, the sort of building that we're doing, and the ability now to get some support to really fuel that through this CHIPS Act. Pat has called it, the most important industrial policy, change since the 30s. And I truly believe that. And, we've also seen the same level of excitement from governments in Europe, where we've also committed to do some build out. So I think the ability to really create that capacity is going to allow us to fulfill, a whole lot more of what we wanted to do. So to me, I think that's been super exciting, and it's exciting to be with a CEO who really thinks about things in such a geopolitical way. He's a fantastic technologist, but I think he also looks at the world in a very realistic business perspective, which complements much of the exciting technologies that we're doing. I'm sure Mike will geek out on something with AI.
Yeah.
Or
well, yeah, I mean,
I
just start with Pat coming in about a year and a half ago. I mean, he's a technologist at heart, right? It's and so having him back at like, hey, what are the big moonshots that we're actually going to go do? How do we get them in place? Where are we going? I mean, it's super energizing for technologists, right? And you've seen some of those names come back that were, frankly, they were at Intel and they left because they got frustrated. They've come back, right? And so that doesn't happen overnight. I spent a little time earlier saying, hey, 3 to 4 years, what are you going to see? We're going to start to see things come in. We're going to bring in hybrid was a good first step. We'll advance that as we kind of get through. How do we shift everything over to the low power cores or efficient cores and do some tuning of how we do kind of thread direction of those things? So there's a lot more that we can actually do to capitalize now that we kind of have that infrastructure in place. I think graphics, you've seen us talk about maybe a little bit about ARC and where we're headed and bringing new levels of graphics compute. We've mentioned things that we're going to bring AI accelerators, we call VPUs, but you'll hear them called MPUs in that space, which is, hey, if I want something that's really low power that runs continuous, can I, do it super more, efficient in that space? And what are those things? You can do things like right now we're on Zoom, right? I have a background blur on and we've got some certain level of quality. We can actually dial that up. If we give these software vendors the ability to run a lot heavier duty, complex AI algorithms, they have them in the works. It's just the endpoints aren't capable of them, right? So you move from a, 360p kind of a 360 resolution or capability to maybe 1080p with all these different blocks that are the Brady Bunch blocks that are around us. So cool things that we can do there, bringing in next generation of capabilities on wireless, and so there's just a ton of runway, right? We're making the investments in the fab, we're making the investments in the people in the design teams. You're going to start to see that roll out, not just like next year, but what are the next 3 or 4 years? We've got big things that are around the horizon that are going to be coming. And so I think if you talk to the technologists at Intel, they're pretty excited to see what the next few years brings.
Very exciting stuff, and I'm sure we can't wait to see what the future has in store with all of these exciting things like AI accelerators and the excitement of actually getting better video quality on Zoom. Wow, wouldn't that be amazing? Holy cow, that would be a dream come true. So with that though, time has flown, and we unfortunately are out of time. Stephanie, I'd love for you to tell us where, if people want to get in touch with you, learn more about some of the stuff that you're talking about, learn more about Intel vPro, where can they go? How can they get in touch with you? And Michael, the same with you. How can they get in touch with you as well? Stephanie, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm active on Twitter is really where we are really putting a lot of making sure that we're out there communicating, and that's at Steph Hallford with an underline. So look me up there. And, obviously we are pretty active through our own, we have an intel.com/business, and we put and make sure that a lot of our updates and our information's there and always reachable through that as well. But Twitter's probably the easiest.
And Michael, what about you? Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I think for me, definitely the Intel.com business. You'll see me put out some blogs as we go through. I spend a lot of my time in security, so you'll see updates through there. I'm a little more LinkedIn. I haven't quite got around to the Twitter. I've been telling myself for the last 18 months I'm going to get more active. It just hasn't. It's on my list of things to work on, but it's not totally natural. So I got some work to do in that, but definitely LinkedIn and Intel.com.
Well, excellent stuff. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure there's even a lot more to talk about that we weren't able to get to today, but I'm sure we'll have you both back to expand on some of these and learn more about the cool things that Intel is doing. So with that, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, Antoine will be with us on the other side. We're going to break down the show and have a little bit of fun. And Rich will try to predict the future, which is always, like hit or miss, but we'll see how that goes and more. So if you want to see all that, stick around. We will be right back. And we are back with part 3 of this episode of ChannelPro Weekly. Coming back from that awesome interview with Stephanie Hallford and Michael Nordquist from Intel. And oh my goodness, well, it was kind of a long interview. We really lost track of time. But normally when that happens, it's because the information is really interesting or really valuable. And I completely learned a lot of stuff. And Antoine, I'm pretty sure you learned quite a bit as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I love being a part of this and also, tuning in to the podcast.
So Rich, any highlights or takeaways you want to point out?
I mean, obviously there are a ton, but the one thing towards the end there, Stephanie was talking about how frustrating it can be for the OEMs, the hardware makers, to be unable to meet demand for a product over like a $1 part, basically. So I mean, there are all these different components, and there's this $1 thing that you can't get, and it just reminded me of a conversation that I had just a couple months ago with an executive from Dell, and that was exactly what she said. And you could hear the frustration in her voice, basically, about how upsetting it is. Basically, I'm trying to remember how she phrased it, but it's like you suddenly realize how incredibly critical these seemingly trivial parts can be if you just can't get them. So that really has been obviously an issue for the hardware makers and therefore for the hardware resellers.
Yeah, I can only imagine it's frustrating for like a car company making a car to be like, well, we could get the car on the road, except there's a shortage of this one rubber washer that we just can't get, and that can screw everything up. It's really, really fascinating. Antoine, any takeaways or highlights that you want to point out?
I mean, I going back to just supply chain, how that's been the thorn in every MSP side. I mean, it really was just, awesome to kind of see that, as much as we always don't think the vendor understands that, our need for these, pieces and parts and systems, they're also aware, right, that there is a big problem. And I think it's very remarkable that Intel is like in tune with that, especially like these $1 parts. I mean, I couldn't even agree more. Like we've had this issue just for some of the, servers and other components that we've been ordering that have just been on these crazy back orders. So no, I couldn't agree more. So.
Very, very good. Well, it was a great interview, and I always look forward to having Stephanie on. I can't wait for her and Michael, especially Michael. He's a really, really smart guy too, to come back on and tell us more about what's going on in Intel and some of the stuff that they're doing, because they do a lot of things. Intel is a very big company, if you didn't know. They make stuff, processors, lots of them, and lots of other. They do lots of other things too. What else do they do? They do processors. They do make motherboards. I'm having like this complete like brain lapse of the things they do, but they do a lot of things. You can go to intel.com and they'll tell you all about it. Rich, we don't have a lot of time left. The show's running a little long, but I know we want to play a little game. And we were talking about something off the air, and I think this is the perfect game to play with Mr. Antoine. Rich, tell us what we're gonna do.
So this is something we've been doing. We've done a number of times in recent episodes, Antoine. And the basic idea is either I or Matt will name you two examples in a particular category, and you will pick which one you prefer. You can only have one. The winner advances to the next round and then competes against another example in that category. And so we've done like junk food in the past. What we're going to do here, and this, by the way, is inspired by a little bit of chit chat we had with Stephanie Hallford off the air after that interview, because she reminded us that we had asked her about her favorite breakfast cereal the first time that she was on the show, and she's pretty sure she said Lucky Charms. And so we're going to play this game with breakfast cereals, basically. Matt and I are each going to get 3 chances here to test the winner of all breakfast cereals for Antoine Jackson.
All right. Well, and I will go first. And let's see. I do love me a good breakfast cereal. So but I'm trying to think what breakfast cereals would you like? So I'm gonna start with 2. I'm going right for the jugular here. Cocoa Puffs versus Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Man, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, you got me, bro.
Cinnamon Toast Crunch is a delicious one. I
So
don't know.
good.
I don't even know if I could decide between those two, but
Oh, so good.
all right. So Rich, Cinnamon Toast Crunch to you.
Well, let's bring Stephanie Halford's favorite in here: Cinnamon Toast Crunch versus Lucky Charms.
I mean, listen, I love me some leprechauns, but Cinnamon Toast Crunch, that's my jam.
Cinnamon Toast Crunch is still in the lead here. Let's try Cinnamon Toast Crunch versus one of my personal favorites, Golden Grams.
Ooh, man, those little teddy bears. Yeah, the grams always win.
The Grams are in the lead now. Knocked out Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Rich, over to you.
This is either going to be really easy or really hard. I'm curious to see. So Golden Grams versus Cheerios.
Oh man,
Plain Cheerios?
Yeah,
That's like what is that? Plain Cheerios?
I mean, I see what you're doing there, because I would feel not patriotic if I did not like Cheerios, but the grams are good, man. The grams are good. It's about the sugar. It's about the badness,
Cheerios is like the drywall of cereal. How can like, anybody actually pick that over anything else? That's like what you have, like it's all there is. It's Cheerios versus Starvation, right? Then
well, believe it or not, actually, like kids that are almost 2 love Cheerios. So like that's why it's like a household favorite right now, because that's like all my daughter will eat right now. So
Like really, like yellow box, plain Cheerios. Not
oh
Honey
yeah,
Nut Cheerios, that's a whole different thing.
very plain. Yeah, palate like her dad, very plain and boring. So.
Wow, interesting. All right, we'll do one more each. We'll see if we can top the Golden Grams. Let's see, Golden Grams versus Peanut Butter Crunch. Oh, I love Peanut Butter Captain Crunch.
We might have a winner there. Yeah, Crunch all day. Come on.
Reg, I'll give you a chance to top it, but I think I don't really think we're gonna top Peanut Butter Captain Crunch.
That and I have said before on the show, I'm like a peanut butter freak. So like for me, I'm thinking, wow, that would be kind of hard to top. And this probably won't do it, but I'll just go with a classic and see if that mixes things up. Peanut Butter Captain Crunch or Frosted Flakes.
Still going with the peanut butter, but hey, if Clinton Jackson, my 82-year-old father, was on this podcast, he would definitely go with your other option of the Frosted Flakes.
Frosted Flakes, they're great, but not greater than peanut butter.
Correct.
That is the cereal of cereals. Let it forever be known. That is our winner today. Go and get a box at your local grocery store today. Rich, great show. We'll say goodbye to Antoine in just a second, but before we go and do that, why don't you tell us a little bit about what we missed? Because like we said, we didn't have a show last week because we were traveling for the events. So we missed a lot of stuff, and then tell us what might be coming up down the pike next week.
Well, a great way to catch up on stuff you might have missed is to go to channelpronetwork.com every Friday and look for the In Case You Missed It post by our own James Gaskin. This week, he's going to be talking about the new channel chief at MSP 360, a new partner program for MSSPs from Deep Instinct, some new hybrid work-friendly desk phones from the folks at Poly, and a somewhat counterintuitive story about why the Japanese government is encouraging young people to drink more alcohol, and James will have all the details on that for you. Now, coming up next week, not a lot of things that are shareable publicly, but I will say that, and speaking of Poly is part of HP these days. HP is going to be doing their Amplify Executive Forum event in Palo Alto next week. I will be attending. I believe I will be doing my part of this podcast from the hotel room there in Palo Alto next week, and I will have all the details about what happened and what they announced.
Very, very cool. Well, it's time that we say goodbye to our good friend Antoine Jackson, president of Enitech Solutions. So great having you on. It's always a blast when you're here and getting your take, because you're like right in the thick of things. You are living this every day. A lot of the news stories that are affecting you directly, and it's always good to get your take on it. And plus, you're a super good guy with great taste in breakfast cereal. So always awesome. For anybody who wants to learn more about you, reach out to you, connect with you, put up a business deal together with you, whatever, where can they go? How can they find you?
Well, I'm trying to get my followers up. LinkedIn, Twitter, Antoine, like Antwine Jackson. There's not many of us out there. Come find me, bro.
And indeed they should, and they won't regret it. That is a promise. And of course, we will hopefully have you back again in a future episode. That is going to wrap it for episode 236. Make sure you subscribe to Channel Pro Weekly everywhere podcasts are found. There are Google, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is, we are most likely there. We're also on YouTube. Leave a good comment, leave a rating, leave a good comment rating on the whatever podcast app you use as well. It's always very, very, very helpful. And of course, tell a friend. Tell a friend about Channel Pro Weekly. Tell a colleague. Tell somebody. Listen together. It'll give you guys something to gather around the water cooler and talk about the ridiculous things that I say, or the really smart things that Rich says, or talk about our awesome guests like Antoine. So make sure you do that. It can be a social thing, and you don't even have to go to a web browser to a social network. This can be your new social network. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but let's roll with that anyway. And of course, go to channelpronetwork.com each and every day. Bookmark it, set it as your homepage. There you'll find the latest articles, white papers, resources, downloads, news items, and it's basically all kinds of great information that will help you keep on top of what's going on in the business or in the channel, and things that will help you make your business better, run more efficiently, help you make more money. You want all of these things. Trust me. Go there each and every day, and of course, join us in Washington, D.C. If you're in the D.C. area, anywhere in there, and that means if you're in New York, that's just a train ride down. You can come Newark, New Jersey, anywhere in that general vicinity. Make sure you're there. Don't miss it. Don't be square. Come to the event September 7th and 8th. Make sure you attend events.channelpronetwork.com. That's going to be it for 236. We will see everybody next week. See you then.